Today, Thursday, March 16, 1972, from Ponca City, Oklahoma, we are interviewing Mrs. Glenn Paris. Mrs. Paris, will you bring us up to some degree about your background, historical and otherwise, about you and your husband?
My husband, my former husband, Earnest Thompson, was the last elected chief of the Kaw Indian tribe. He died in 1938, April 15th. Since his death, we have perpetuated his Indian collection and it was first displayed in the Ponca City Library, and we had the opening on June 1939. June the 16th, 1939. At that time we had speakers from all over, Indian speakers. We had Dr. Rocloud, who was a graduate of Yale University. We had the stage was decorated with the original oil paintings loaned by Mr. E.W. Marlin for the occasion. And then we had the different Indians who sang and danced on the stage. Let's see. It was a unique and colorful ceremony in Ponca City, Oklahoma. It was one of the final episodes in the great unrolling panorama of the passing of the Oklahoma Indians. Never before has there been precisely such a ceremony as this, and never will it be repeated. It was poignantly unique. A man had died, is this so? A man of simple tastes and a great heart, in whose veins the blood of the white race and the Indian mingled. A man who combined the culture of the white with the simplicity of the red man, and reconciled the two with utter dignity. This man was Earnest Thompson, who at his death was chief of the Kaw Nation by election, an untimely death, for he was a young man and left a growing young family fatherless. Emmett Thompson lived the life of a white man in Ponca City, but a fierce pride in his red heritage burned within his breast, and he devoted his energies to the interests of his half-brothers, the Kaw Tribe of Indians. They loved him, and quite simply and wholeheartedly he loved them back, and gave of his superior abilities to their service. I'd like to tell you about some of the paintings that Mr. Marlin loaned for this ceremony. One was Chief of the Otos by Henry's Ballank, loaned by Mr. Marlin. Two other Ballank masterpieces were Chief Horse, Chief Eagle, and Chief Bacon Rind. They were, of course, on the stage at this time. Except for a fine Navajo rug, there were no other decorations. More would have been an exaggeration. The rooms were packed to capacity for this ceremony. Men and women stood lining the wall. Odd children sat cross-legged on the floor. It was remotely crowded. There were distinguished men and women, men of mixed bloods, a few full-blood Indians, writers, artists, businessmen, socially prominent women, friends of Mr. Thompson, both white and red. Mr. and Mrs. E.W. Marlin were present. R. Gordon Matsine, the painter and collector of Oriental art. Mr. Henry Rocloud from Washington, D.C., wife of the Indian educator. John Joseph Matthews, Pard Osage, the well-known author, and his sister, Miss Lillian Matthews, curator of the Indian Museum at Pawhuska. Mrs. Thompson was there. That was, of course, myself. The Thompson children. Mrs. I.E. Doney, mother of the deceased chieftain. Hundreds were there. Heat and expectancy hung heavy over the hushed people. A tom-tom began to throb off stage, soft and muffled, as if distant and far away, With stately tread, Red Eagle of the Osage Indian tribe, Obi Buffalo of the Poncas, Mose Belmar, chief-elect of the Kaws, and Dr. Henry Rocloud came from the wings to take their seats on the platform. The tom-tom swelled with quickening tempo and mounting volume under the palms of the Indian drummers, Robinson Pepper, Ray Mahuja, and Charles Mahuja. Obi Buffalo, in black blanket bordered with blue beads and turquoise beaded moccasins, his black hair braided, rose to stand at rigid attention, his left arm unflung, his head bowed, his right hand holding his fan of eagle feathers against his breast. Like some primitive statue, he stood there against the dusty velvet of the curtains, against the flaming beauty from Ballink's inspired brush. The drums rolled, throbbing, stirring to answering, throbbed the full hearts within the breasts of those who had known and loved this man, Earnest Thompson, chief of his tribe, servant of his people. Then the chorus began, muted, as if by distance, sung by Indian singers, Hugh Eagle, Tony Knight, Obi Buffalo, White Star, sung in soft-tongued Indian language. They were chanting the Emmett Thompson's gift song. When an Indian has performed some distinguished service, the song-makers of his tribe make for him a song which is his and his alone forever. This song had been made for Ernest Emmett Thompson in recognition of outstanding service. It swelled until it rolled out rich and full, a requiem wordlessly eloquent of victory and final triumph. Then it sank to silence, the drums stilled under the hands that beat them. All right. In their song, in their gift, these people were saying to the people of Ponca City, we think this was a great man, he whom we commemorate. In order to become great, is it so necessary to go striding tempestuously about in mighty endeavor to leave vast footprints in the sands of time? Is it not even finer to move quietly and gently, leaving behind heart throbs in the breasts of men? This collection has been moved to the Cultural Center in Ponca City and is now displayed on the second floor of the Cultural Center building. I'm doing that right.
Mrs. Paris, tell us about Charlie Curtis and the Kaw Indians.
The Kaw Indians lived in the Kansas-Nebraska area. They were given reservations in Kansas, which they relinquished in 1873, when they came to their present home in Kay County, just northeast of Ponca City. Vice President Charles Curtis was a member of the tribe and held an allotment in Kay County. Charles Curtis was a member of the Kaw, or Kansas tribe, and received his allotment of land in the Kaw Reservation in Oklahoma. He was an attorney, statesman, diplomat, leader in 19th century Indian affairs, longtime congressman, and senator from Kansas. Curtis was the first man of Indian descent to be elected vice president of the United States, being the running mate of President Herbert Hoover in the campaign of 1928. Following the creation of the Dawes Commission, a resultant of the opening of the Oklahoma country in 1889 to white settlement, Curtis fathered the famous Curtis Act, finally approved June the 28th, 1898, which made sweeping changes in the affairs of the 5 civilized tribes, substituting federal courts for Indian courts, enrollment of Indian citizens by the Dawes Commission, and allotment of lands and many other provisions for the final closing of Indian governments. Curtis was one of the most outstanding floor leaders of the United States Senate in history and had given more than 40 years devoted service to his government and to the Indian people when death came to him February the 8th, 1936 in Washington, D.C. Mr. Thompson and I have visited Mr. Curtis in Washington, D.C. when he was vice president many times, and when he came to Pawnee, Oklahoma for a celebration they were having, they had what they call a carriage or a surrey, and Mr. Curtis was to ride in the parade in this vehicle, and some of the dignitaries thought they were to ride with him, but he said no, he preferred that Emmett Thompson ride in the carriage with him.
Mrs. Paris, you have quite a story there about John Joseph Matthews. Let's hear about Mr. Matthews.
Joseph Matthews lives on a ranch in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, and he wrote Talking to the Moon, and he wrote Wakanta, and this was published by the University of Oklahoma Press and became a Book of the Month Club selection. This was in 1932, and he's written many others since, including He's writing his autobiography in 2 volumes under the beautiful title of 20,000 Mornings. The first volume will be titled Boy, Horse, and Dog. The title hasn't yet been chosen for the second. This autobiography's publication is bound to be a real literary event, especially for Oklahomans. Joseph Matthews was a good friend of of ours, and that was Edward Donahoe of Ponca City. Edward and the late George Milgren had visited Joe and his ranch many times. Joseph Matthews now lives in a stone cabin on the highest hill of his 1,200-acre ranch in Osage Country. I want to see his wife, Danny. Joseph is married to the former Elizabeth Hunt.
Mrs. Paris, we know with your background that you, in your time, must have encountered a lot of the most important people that has gone to make Ponca City and Oklahoma living and doing the things that we are doing today. Could you give us some of the information about some of these pioneers that you had come in contact, from the past and now to the present?
Mr. E.W. Marlin was a personal friend of ours, and I had lunch with he and Mrs. Marlin and Mrs. Dillard Clark a few days before his death. We used to ride with the Marlins, and they'd have these hunt breakfasts in the mansion, and he was a great entertainer. But more than that, he had an eye for beauty. He brought specimen of trees and shrubs and to Ponca City that they didn't think it was possible for them to grow here. We have an acreage that we acquired from the Marlin estate, and on that acreage we have any number of rare trees that we would have never had it not been for the Marlin and Mr. Marlin and his gardeners. And when the high school pupils or students in their science, they want to find the rare trees, they come to our house and our grounds to find them. And that is what Mr. Marlin did. He had a golf course here, and then he beautified that, and then they, of course, built homes on where the golf course was, and he built 2 mansions. One of them now is a cultural center, and the other one is a Catholic school. And then he had these rare paintings and furniture and all that he loved so much. And now we have, as a memento to him, we have these trees and all left in his memory.
Mrs. Paris, you remember anything historically about Mr. Lou Wentz and also the starting of the oil industry here in Ponca City.
Mr. Wentz was, of course, he brought the oil industry to Ponca, but one of his activities in Ponca was to have a ball club. What do you call it, farm? A farm club here, which is very interesting. I knew Will Rogers. About the main thing I can remember about him, though, is watching him play polo at Claremore, Oklahoma, with some of my friends. I would also like to talk about Mrs. Ike Clubb from Kaw City, whom I've known all my life, and she had this wonderful collection that was valued at $1.5 million. It was housed in the club hotel at Kaw City, and the hotel was built in 1920 at a large cost. And now the the collection is now in the Philbrook Museum at Tulsa. I'd like to tell about Washunga, Oklahoma, which of course will now be underwater with the Kaw Dam. Washunga for years served as the Kaw capital from 1880 to 1930. It also had the sub-agency there from 1930 to 1940. The Kaw agency was built between 1895 and 1880. There's a building near this, the council meeting building is still standing there at Washunga. And there's a question about where it's to be moved. Of course, it will have to be moved since the water of the Kaw Lake will be over it. And we're trying very hard to get it in Ponca City. And Ponca City has asked for it, and they've said that they would be glad to reconstruct it and keep it in its original form.